So we're back on the record. Maher.
Thank you.
You remember you are still under oath,
Yes, Your Honor.
and you were about to tell us about spectrographic analysis. Thank you, Mr. Bell.
Thank you very much, Your Honor.
You're welcome. And thank you to your office for putting this up.
Yes, Judge.
My neck is going to be less sore this afternoon. Appreciate it.
Prior to the break, yes, Judge O'Donnell did say, we were talking about the different techniques that you employed in your study here, or your analysis of the exhibit. And we had gone through critical listening, and we were about to speak about spectrographic analysis. Sir, you provided a report, as you've said before, correct?
Yes.
And in that report is your CV as it relates to the activity that we're talking about today. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And you have given or made several publications. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Have you adequately talked about those publications? Are they mentioned within your report?
I list in the report, in the introductory section, several publications that I have made in peer-reviewed journals that describe gunshot acoustical analysis in particular. And then in the attachment to the report, which is my full CV, that includes the complete list of publications on those topics and others.
Okay, so for brevity's sake, all of that is in State's Exhibit 1059. Is that correct?
Yes.
You go through those publications that you had created and published. Those have been gone through peer review. Is that correct, sir?
Yes, they have.
Okay. And as it relates to what we're talking about today, your critical listening techniques, spectrographic analysis, and eventually waveform analysis, those techniques were used in those publications, correct?
That's correct, yes.
And all of that has gone through peer review. Is that correct, sir?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. So you've explained to us what critical listening is. Can you please continue on then with the second methodology that you've employed, spectrographic analysis?
Spectrographic analysis is a mathematical formula. It's a calculation that is done using what is known as a Fourier transform.
I'm sorry?
Fourier, a French name, F-O-U-R-I-E-R. Joseph Fourier lived late 1700s to early 1800s and was a mathematician, and his discovery, or his revelation, was that you can represent a time waveform, such as an acoustic signal or some other signal, either as a time signal or in the frequency domain as a summation of frequency elements, which are different sinusoids. So it's possible mathematically then to take a signal such as an audio recording and convert it into a Fourier transform where we are looking at the frequency spectrum. So the term spectrographic analysis is referring to an observation of the spectrum of an audio signal. And we generally interpret the spectrum of the signal in spectrographic analysis using a spectrogram, which is a special graph. So like any other graph, there are axes, and the horizontal axis in a spectrogram is time. So we're looking from left to right in the graph as a time axis. And the vertical axis in the graph is frequency. So an element of the signal that occurs early in the time sequence at low frequency will be in the lower left corner of that graph. And a sound event that occurs at high frequency late in the time sequence will be in the upper right corner of the graph. And so we're looking at a representation of what happens, what unfolds over time as a function of frequency. And then traditionally in a spectrogram, the brightness or the level of the signal at that particular time and that particular frequency are represented with a color or a dark light intensity.
Okay, so a spectrogram is the graph that you produce after doing the spectrographic analysis.
Yes,
Is that
that's correct. The spectrogram is the result of spectrographic analysis.
Okay, and besides using this in your practice here, when you do evaluate different audios, do you also teach this in the coursework that you described before? Is that correct?
Yes, time variant spectral analysis is a part of the digital signal processing curriculum in electrical engineering.
Okay, and waveform analysis, sir, the third methodology that you employ, what is that, please?
Waveform analysis would be observing graphically a representation of the audio signal. So the audio signal that is picked up by a microphone or some other sensor is a detection of the pressure in the air instantaneously that varies as time goes on. So the waveform, that term means the representation of that pressure signal as a function of time. So when the signal is loud or intense, it will have a high amplitude or be a large vertical deflection. And if the signal is quiet, it'll be a small deflection. So by observing that fluctuating pressure signal as a function of time, we can analyze some of the characteristics that we can also hear if we listen to that same signal played through a loudspeaker.
Okay, and you employed that methodology in this examination or evaluation, is that
Yes.
correct?
Yeah.
And you teach that as well, is that correct, sir?
Yes, it's a standard representation for a signal such as an audio signal.
Okay. Now there are also other techniques that can be used as well to evaluate audio. Is that correct, sir?
Yes.
All right. Peak analysis, what is that?
Well, peak analysis would be looking at the waveform that we've been discussing to identify where the highest deflection or highest pressure would be located.
Okay. And have you ever done that yourself?
I have done that on occasion. It was not a principal part of this particular investigation.
Okay. And how about correlational analysis, sir?
Correlation analysis refers to looking at the waveform as a time sequence and observing changes that occur from one time to another and trying to identify a particular repetition or a particular relationship in that waveform from one time to another.
Okay. Is there such a thing as called contour energy analysis or energy analysis, sir?
I am not familiar with that exact term, but I have heard about energy time curves and other types of analysis like that.
Okay. As far as the critical listening, spectrographic analysis, waveform analysis, those three which you used here, and peak analysis and correlational or correlation analysis that you've discussed, are all of those methodologies and techniques used in your industry, sir?
Yes, there are techniques that are known in the electrical engineering field and are used in audio forensic analysis.
Okay, and have those theories or techniques been tested, first of all?
Yes, they are used frequently and compared amongst each other to establish the reliability and the integrity of that type of analysis.
Okay, and have they also been subjected to peer review?
These techniques are now expected and looked for in a peer review process, so they are under peer review and have been accepted in that fashion.
Okay, and all of those techniques, is there a known or potential rate of error, thirdly?
There are, in all of these, like any measurement, there is potential that there will be discrepancy in how that measurement is made. If we're measuring the length of an object via several different techniques, there might be small discrepancies between those that we would need to account for. So because this is the analysis that we're describing is a mathematical procedure, it can be verified and tested, and all of the potential errors can be established mathematically.
And fourth and finally, is the methodologies that we've discussed here, again, critical listening, spectrographic analysis, waveform analysis, peak analysis, correlation analysis, has the methodologies there been or gained general acceptance?
These, certainly the spectrographic analysis, as I mentioned, dates back to the early 1800s, and so these have been used, established, and are routinely taught in our educational programs at the college level. Yes.
Okay. You became interested in this field of audio examinations approximately what year, sir?
Well, my background in audio engineering and audio signal processing dates back to the 1980s when I was an undergraduate college student. My interest in forensic audio investigation has been more recent, and that started about the year 2002.
Okay. And have you gathered information from these different methodologies and publicized them, published them in your own writing, sir?
Yes, as part of my role as a university professor, I educate students, I create new knowledge, and then I perform public service as part of that job. And so the discovery of new knowledge entails writing reports, writing articles, and submitting them for peer review. And so I've been doing that in the field of audio forensics for more than 10 years now.
Okay. Are there conferences that one attends if they're interested in this field work?
Yes, audio forensics is covered by three major professional organizations. The first one I'll mention is the Audio Engineering Society. The Audio Engineering Society is a membership-based professional organization, and it has a special technical committee on audio forensics. So there are individuals in the Audio Engineering Society who do all different kinds of audio, but the forensic specialists have their own special technical committee, and I'm a member of that committee. Okay. The other organizations are the Acoustical Society of America. The Acoustical Society has been around since 1929 and studies all different aspects of acoustics, and it also has a technical committee on audio forensics, of which I'm a member. And the third organization is the IEEE, the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers. That's a professional organization of electrical engineers, and it has a special publication area on forensics. And so all three of those organizations are active in this area, and I'm a member of all of those.
Okay. Was there a conference in London recently?
The Audio Engineering Society every couple of years has an Audio Forensics International Conference, and the most recent one was held in London in the summer of 2000.
Attended that?
I did attend that, and presented a peer-reviewed paper on gunshot analysis from recording devices.
And that was your presentment at that conference?
Yes.
Attended by how many people in this field of acoustic engineering or electrical engineering?
I would have to look up the exact attendance, but it's approximately 100 people.
Okay. You familiar with Bruce Koenig?
Yes, I know Mr. Koenig.
Okay. And his work, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. You've reviewed other publications by him, sir?
Yes, I have.
Okay. And are you familiar with Durand Bagalt as well, sir?
Yes, I know Dr. Bagalt.
Okay. And you're familiar with his work?
Yes, I am.
Okay. And Jack Freitag?
Yes, I know
The
Mr.
same
Freitag.
questions?
Yes, I know him, and I'm familiar with his work.
Okay. And Steve Beck as well, sir?
And I know Stephen Beck, and I'm familiar with his work.
Okay. As it relates to this case, Mr. Maher, you explained that it was requested of you to do a preliminary investigation to determine whether or not the information in front of you, that is the 1059A, the disc, might be able to be reviewed and then measured. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And then after you did that, and you contacted our office to say that that is in fact the case, what further techniques or testing did you do? And can you tell the court about your findings with that, please?
In May of 2014, I had been contacted by your office and did the preliminary examination to ascertain if it was going to be possible to address some questions regarding the gunshot sounds that were present in the recording. So I had verified that I could retrieve those sounds and analyze them. And at that time, as part of our email and phone conversation, I was asked to look in particular at the latter segment of that recording and determine the gunshots and their characteristics.
Okay. And I believe that you characterized it as a first barrage and a second barrage. Is that correct, sir?
The portion of the recording begins with several minutes of video and audio that appears to be the police vehicle moving from one place to another and has no sounds of gunshots present in that portion of the recording. Late in the recording, about 9 minutes, 9:50, I can look up the exact time, file elapsed time into that recording, the sound of gunshots are apparent, and that is the point at which there is a first sequence of gunshots that I refer to as the first barrage. It's an overlapping sequence of many different gunshots of different intensity and different asynchronous timing, so they're not a volley, they're all at different times. Then there is a gap, which includes a couple other audible sounds, and then there is a second sequence of gunshots that are present in that recording, and that's what I refer to in the report as the second barrage.
Okay. As it relates to your findings, sir, we talked about this in the packet for the court. It's been addressed by you already, State's Exhibit 1059. This is your forensic audio analysis report that we're talking about.
Yes, it is.
And page 2 then explains the introduction, and you've already testified about that. Is that correct, sir?
Yes.
And as well as the beginning of your qualifications. Is that correct, sir?
Yes.
And the page 3 then explains your qualifications and the publications that you've discussed for the court. Is that correct, sir?
Yes, those are the selection of the publications that I've had in my career that specifically relate to audio forensics and gunshot analysis in particular.
Okay. And then page 4 then, sir, to bring us up to speed, you did the initial examination as you testified, and you extracted audio data summary, which we're going to be discussing.
Yes,
that's correct.
That's correct.
So during your review, why don't you take us through what it was that you noticed about the first barrage? I believe you were talking about overlapping shots. Is that correct, sir?
So for the section that I refer to as the first barrage, I performed the 3 techniques of audio forensics that I mentioned. First, I did critical listening to that section. So I isolated that particular portion and listened to it through loudspeakers in my lab, and played it several different times, played different sections, and listened carefully to what I could ascertain from that particular section. As part of that, there is, in addition to the sound of gunshots, there's also the sound of a siren from presumably a police vehicle in the vicinity, and there's also an utterance by an officer, law enforcement, saying something to the effect of "shots fired." Okay. I also used the waveform analysis to look at that segment to verify that there was nothing corrupted about it or any kind of unexplained problem with the integrity of the data, and also examined the signal to identify if the presence of individual gunshots could be detected. And then the third thing that I did was perform the spectrographic analysis to look at that segment of the sound, and then use that third technique then to confirm the findings from the critical listening and from the waveform analysis.
Okay. And did your analysis of the spectrographic analysis and the waveform analysis confirm your critical listening analysis, sir?
Yes.
Then turning then to page 5, you've already spoken about the preliminary examination and interpretation. Your report is consistent with your testimony, is that correct, sir?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And then gunshot acoustics, where you have an explanation of what the gunshot acoustics are, is that correct, sir?
Yes, I felt that in the report it was important to point out the physics of the gunshot signals and the acoustical signals, because they are rather special and unusual compared to speech signals or other types of sounds that people might be more familiar with.
They're loud, is that correct?
They are loud and very short in duration. So the sound of a gun is a very abrupt combustion of gunpowder in the firearm, and so that sound goes from nothing to very loud almost instantaneously, and then dies out very quickly. So the gunshot itself only lasts perhaps 2 or 3 milliseconds, or 2 or 3 thousandths of a second.
And again, you're very familiar with that sound from doing other analysis, is that correct, sir?
Yes, this is a part of the gunshot forensics work that I have done, and we've also performed experiments where we deliberately make recordings of different firearms and understand their acoustical properties.
Okay. So not only your reviews, but you're actually doing testing themselves,
Yes.
creating up or creating examinations. Is that correct, sir?
It's because we're able to do a gunshot experiment under controlled conditions from a scientific standpoint, then we have more confidence in our type of analysis because we can compare what we find from the analysis to what the actual recording conditions were. And then we can apply that confidence and that understanding to cases like this where the signals are captured under uncontrolled conditions, meaning it was not set up in a careful way specifically for gunshot recording.
Okay. And can you do gunshot analysis of a dash cam recorder?
Yes, in the situation in which the microphone that is used with the dash cam is located in the vicinity of where the gunshots occur, and also we want to be concerned that we do not have a situation in which the microphone is so close to the gunshot that its high level actually clips or distorts the electronics of the recording system. Then we can obtain a very good and useful gunshot signature from that recording.
Okay. And sir, you're aware that the audio that you received was from a Brelo police cruiser. Is that correct?
Yes, I was told that this came from a dash cam located in a Brelo police vehicle.
Okay. Now, shooting then through page 6, which you've testified about, and to page 7, you've explained to us that there is a spectrogram that you create after a spectrographic analysis. Is that correct, sir?
Yes.
And you talked about the colors. Is this what we're talking about here on page 7 of your report?
Yes, that is figure 1 from the report, and that particular graph shows 2 different parts of the analysis. At the top of the graph is a kind of greenish colored representation. That is the time waveform of that particular segment of the audio recording. And so that time waveform, the sort of turquoise color, if we zoomed in on that, we would see individual changes in pressure and so forth. And this is at a zoom out level where we're seeing just the overall envelope of that audio. And then the lower portion of the figure in the middle that has the orange and red and violet colored section, that is a spectrogram. And so the horizontal axis of that particular graph is showing the time sequence from 9 minutes 41 seconds into the recording until 10 minutes and 1.5 seconds.
Okay.
So it's a period of roughly 20 seconds.
Showing you, sir, State's Exhibit 1059B, which is in the court's packet. Is this exhibit here what we're seeing up on the screen?
The exhibit you're showing me is actually figure 2, which is also in the report, but it's the second figure. It's a portion of that, the figure that you're seeing here. Yes, now I see it displayed on the screen.
Okay.
That's what you just showed me on the paper.
Thank you. And going back then to figure number 1, would you be able to show us, if we get you closer, and answer some questions? Would you be able to do that, sir?
Yes, would you?
Your Honor, may the witness leave the stand to go over the Mondo pad, please.
Sure.
Thank you very much. Doctor, would you stand on this side, please? Please explain to the court what we're talking about. You mentioned the green area, is that correct, at the top here, sir?
Yes, that's the time waveform that represents the instantaneous pressure detected by the microphone as a function of time.
Okay. Anything else that we can learn from that, sir?
In observing the time waveform, we can see that there are spikes and detectable peaks that are located in there. And earlier you had asked about an analysis of peaks in a waveform, and that is one of the ways that those can be determined is from that time waveform.
The time waveform peak analysis can be done in this area, is that correct?
That's correct.
You also talked much earlier, before the break, about the X and the Y axis, sir. Can you explain to us what we're looking at here? Do we have discernible markings on this graph?
Yes, the lower portion, which I'm highlighting here,
It's touchy, you can't get too close.
Oh, I did that? Okay. So we can
That's
switch back.
Scroll it down.
I can do it myself. Maybe. Okay. So the lower portion of this figure that has the bright colors in it, the horizontal axis on this moving from left to right is scaled in time. And so at the left edge of the image here, it is 9 minutes and 41 seconds. And at the right edge of the image,
okay.
We'll do this.
thank you. Apologize for that. And at the right edge of the image, it's at 10 minutes and 1.5 seconds. The vertical scale of that image is showing frequency, which is measured in cycles per second or hertz. And it starts at the bottom of the graph at very low frequencies, 0, and then ends up at the top of the graph at a frequency of about 4,000 cycles per second.
Earlier on in your testimony, you talked about overlapping gunshots. Is that correct, in the first barrage?
Yes.
And could you point to the area where we're talking about?
So in the section of the spectrogram here, starting at about 9 minutes 42 seconds, you can see a series of vertical orange lines. And those continue on for several seconds along the horizontal axis here. Those vertical horizontal lines indicate in the spectrogram a sound event that is broad in frequency, meaning it extends not at just one frequency but covers a range, and it's very short in duration, so it has very little width to it. So these are very indicative of an impulsive or a abrupt sound that has that particular spectral characteristic. And in this section, the original one here, we see many of those different characteristic signatures that overlap one another in a way that's a little hard to interpret exactly where one sound stops and where the next one starts.
So when you have a number of shots that occur at the same time, it's difficult to determine how many exactly there are. Is that correct, sir?
Yes, just like taking a photograph of overlapping objects, if one is in front of another or in the same position, it's hard to discern each individual aspect of that. And in this case, there's also the utterance of the law enforcement officer saying shots are fired, and you can see that occurring in this section where there's energy at other frequencies that's characteristic of those speech signals.
Okay. And prior to that, sir, how much time elapsed from first discernment shot from the shots fired?
So looking, scroll down slightly here, I've got the time scale labeled across the top. So the first shot is at about 9 minutes 43 seconds, and the start of that utterance by the officer is about 9 minutes 47 seconds. So it would be 3 or 4 seconds after the initial detection of the shot that utterance occurs.
Okay. And again, that utterance is shots are fired, or shots fired.
Yes.
So prior to that, there's shots. Prior after that, there's shots. There's a number of them. They're overlapping. I understand some of them. So
Yes.
making it difficult to discern the exact number as far as that's concerned. Correct? But does there come a time where it does become discernible and clear, sir, as there's less overlapping sound?
At the point indicated by the arrow here, there is a cessation of the gunshots. And so those distinctive vertical lines that are apparent in the spectrogram cease, and that indicates a portion that's also audible and it also can be observed in the waveform where the gunshots are no longer occurring.
And even prior to that, there are some lines that are distinct and separate apart from each other.
That's correct. Several of those become more apparent and non-overlapping.
And then you have an area where there's no yellow lines coming down. Can you explain to us what that is?
So during this section, the color is indicating the intensity or the energy at that particular time and at that particular frequency vertically. And so when there is no signal present that has that characteristic, the spectrogram is going to show at low level, which is indicated by the dark color in the graph here. And that's also can be seen in the time waveform and can also be audible that there's no sound at that point.
So no sound, no gunshots.
No gunshot sounds.
Okay. And then there is a language that you have here on the form, right where there's a purple line with some yellow that goes down. Can you explain to the board and us what that is?
So at that particular instant, there is the audible sound of a car door closing. I'm assuming that it is the Brattonall vehicle that is closing, and that gets recorded along with all the other sounds that are present in that scene.
And that's a clear, distinct sound to you, is that correct, sir?
Yes, it has greater time extent, so the width of that line is longer, and also you can see that the extent in frequency goes all the way up over the whole range here. So it's so loud, in fact, that it actually maxes out the microphone, it clips the microphone.
There's a comment here about distant siren. Can you explain that to the board?
There are indications here in red in the middle where you can see kind of a curving shape that goes on, and that corresponds to the sound of a siren. And that siren on the police vehicle, as its pitch increases, you can see that, where as time goes on, it's going to a higher pitch, and then it returns back down to a lower one. So along with all of this sound of the gunshots, there's also in the background that audible sound of the siren.
What are these two white arrows?
In the indication here, this white arrow is indicating the last detectable gunshot in the first barrage, or this first sequence of overlapping gunshots. The next white arrow there is indicating a isolated single gunshot that is present during this quiet interval when there were not overlapping shots or not a loud sequence of sounds. So that's indicating the presence of one isolated audible gunshot.
And how much time has elapsed between these two white arrows?
I don't have in mind the exact time there, but we can measure that. I believe it's about 52 to 53 and a half, about 1.5 or 1.6 seconds.
With this being the last sound then at first barrage shots before the car door.
Right.
Then moving on beyond where the car door closing reference here, there is a second barrage of shots that you spoke about when you were on the stand. Is that correct, sir?
Yes, so at the conclusion of this, the first barrage, there is a gap of a little over 4 seconds, which includes only a single shot about halfway through that gap and sound of the door closing. Following that, there is a sequence of shots that is an individual set of sounds. And I was able to discern 18 different sounds in that interval, of which 15 of those consisted of a very repetitive and regular gunshot.
Part of your critical listening analysis, is that correct, sir?
A combination of the critical listening, of observing the characteristics here in the spectrogram, in the lower portion in particular, and then observing the corresponding information from the time waveform.
So, pursuant to your report, which we have looked at, this last white mark there, is indicative in your report, is your nomenclature is the last shot of the first barrage. Is that correct, sir?
That would be the right time sequence, yes.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Martin. How much time elapses between that last shot of the first barrage and the startup again for the second barrage?
I'd have to look at, again, carefully at the time scale, but I'm judging it by looking at the graph here, it's about 2.5 seconds.
Okay, and then you have reference again, the white arrows as the starting of the gunshots. Is that correct, sir?
Yes, the section after this gap between where the large number of gunshots ceases, and then there's this relatively long interval of several seconds that only includes the single gunshot. Then the second barrage is this sequence of 18 discernible sounds that I've mentioned.
And specific timing intervals are mentioned in your report. Is that correct?
Yes, so a combination of analyzing this and then looking at the time waveform, we can identify the spacing between each of those individual shots.
And certainly by this time, and even earlier into the going backwards into the first barrage, there are discernible gunshots. Is that correct, sir?
Yes, the second barrage is different in that the gunshot sequence are isolated, where in the first barrage there are many different gunshots overlapping that make it difficult to identify every single individual shot that's present. Although even in the first barrage there are certain sounds that are distinguishable.
And as we get towards the end of that first barrage, they are distinguished.
Yes, and you can see that visually in the spectrogram where the vertical indications here become more regular and more repeated from one to the next, where earlier there's a lot of more complicated spectral information that would be present in the case of multiple overlapping sounds.
Getting to the second barrage then, you testified that there are 18 sounds, is that correct?
Yes.
And of those 18 sounds, there's 15 sounds, is that correct?
In the analysis of the second barrage, there are 15 sounds that are gunshots that are spaced by roughly 300 milliseconds. So they occur at a very regular interval that spans that particular time. The spacing decreases slightly toward the end of the barrage, but they are present in that form. So those 15 are very clearly indicated in the spectrogram, in the critical listening, and in the time waveform analysis.
Okay, stand again. Thank you. Of those sounds that we're talking about, the 18 sounds, is your testimony that 15 are distinct and can be compared as being the same gunshot sound, sir?
Yes, and if we could refer to figure 2 from the report, which is yes, that one. That is the same information as was present in figure 1, but this is restricted to the second barrage time portion of that recording. So indicated on this spectrogram with arrows and numbers at the bottom are the identification of those 15 events that I had referred to. And those are seen in the spectrogram by the vertical abrupt edge, if you can see those yellowish pattern that's above where the arrows are indicated. That corresponds to each of those 15 gunshots.
Correct me if I'm pointing wrong. Use me as your pointer. Number 1 is pointing to yellow. 2, 3, 4, 5. It's the white arrows, and there are 15 white arrows. And these 15 white arrows match to each other. Is that correct?
Right. They're uniquely identifying that particular feature in the spectrogram.
You have some green arrows. Can you explain what those are? In between 4 and 5, 5 and 6, 6 and 7.
In the critical listening phase of this, there are other gunshot-like sounds between those particular shots. Because they are at a time in the sequence where it's difficult to determine the specific characteristics of those sounds, as I indicate in the report, the determination of whether those are echoes of one of the other shots, and by echoes I mean the acoustical sound that's reflected off a nearby surface, nearby object, or if those are gunshots from another firearm, I was not able to determine.
Also listed in there is the siren that you spoke about before, and that continues on past, behind him. Is that correct?
Yes, so the spectrogram is analyzing the entire audio signal, so it's whatever the microphone picked up during that time interval will be reflected in the spectrographic display.
You used critical analysis, listening analysis, as well as the spectrographic analysis that we're viewing now in a spectrogram, and the waveform analysis, all to come to this conclusion?
Yes, that's correct.
Again, the waveform is up above here. Is that correct, sir?
Yes, so that's showing the same information displayed as a time waveform, while the lower part of the figure is the spectrogram, which is showing the version that's been presented using the short-time Fourier transform.
This opinion that you're providing to us, doctors, is based upon a reasonable degree of scientific certainty?
Yes, the results of the report and the conclusions drawn in there are based on my combination of training and experience, and are presented to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty.
Did there come a time, Doctor, when we asked you to review or come back to you with a secondary questions regarding your analysis?
Yes, after I had submitted the report in May of 2014, I believe I had a communication from your office perhaps in October regarding the likelihood that there would be a trial that would involve this evidence. And then in January of this year, 2015, I was notified that by Mr. Chalupka that a report had been expert regarding this audio evidence, and you asked, or Mr. Chalupka asked me to review that evidence.
Okay. You reviewed the evidence and did have conversations with me. Is that correct, sir?
Yes, that's correct.
And is that explained in your packet as State's Exhibit number 1060, sir?
Yes. So subsequent to that discussion in January regarding the other experts' report, then in March you asked to have any additional conclusions that could be drawn from that analysis subsequent to my original look at the evidence back in May of 2014. Specifically, the presence of a gunshot in the gap between the first barrage and the second barrage was brought up as an area that, in which there was interest.
This would be the last shot in the first barrage, which you had noted before in your first report. Is that
Yes,
correct?
so the shot that was concluding the first barrage.
Initially, you'd been asked about the first barrage, the second barrage, and to tell us what it was about that second barrage, if it was a discernible person or discernible gunshot that was being fired. Is that correct?
Yes, so specifically the first report addressed the question of whether the second barrage consisted of sounds that were produced by a single individual.
And then secondarily, you were asked to do an examination and to review the information that you had regarding an earlier shot. Correct, sir?
Yes.
Okay. And you've done that?
Yes.
You
and
used the same methodologies that you employed the first time, sir?
Yes, so this addendum report that is being displayed here, this is Exhibit 1060, was adding on to the conclusions from the original report from May of 2014.
Based upon your analysis then, sir, can you please explain to us what it was that you found?
Turning the attention of the analysis to that sound that is the last shot of the first barrage, that's indicated by the arrow separating in the middle there between the first barrage and second barrage in the figure that's being displayed right now. The question that was presented to me was whether that particular gunshot sound was sufficiently similar to the gunshot sounds that comprise the section labeled second barrage that they could be attributed to come from the same firearm.
Okay. And just so the record's clear, sir, would you please depart from the stand with the court's permission and point out that for the record. Thank you.
So I'm referring to the particular gunshot that is indicated by the arrow in that position on the spectrogram.
Okay. And keeping your voice up for our court reporter, that arrow there, you have an opinion based upon a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, sir.
The sound that is associated with that arrow, you can see the spectrographic display indicated here, was compared to the sequence of sounds that are present in the second barrage. And those sounds, because of their spectrographic energy distribution and their amplitude and the critical listening and the signal analysis, it was my conclusion that that gunshot was similar to the gunshots in the second barrage, to the point that I can say that that is from the same firearm.
Okay. And did you do any other examinations or interpretations of the other data?
This was done using the same techniques that were used originally.
Okay. Any other opinions based upon the first barrage or second barrage that you were asked to look at?
There was again, just reiterating that the first barrage information consists of a very different texture of sounds because of the overlapping gunshots that are present in that section.
Okay. All right, sir. Please take the stand. So the shots 4 through 6, the others that are mentioned, the green arrows that you have on the first diagram, due to their different spectral character, sir, are those additional shots, do they appear to be from another shooter and shooting from another location?
I'm not able to draw that firm scientific conclusion from the analysis of those particular sounds.
You have a conclusion on page 4 of your report, sir.
From page...
on the second report.
Yes, at that point the mention is that they appear to be gunshot-like sounds, and so that those could be possibly attributable to either an echo or to the sound of another firearm. And I'm not able to make a claim to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty about that particular aspect.
One moment, please, Your Honor.
Sure.
What is cadence, sir?
The term cadence would refer to the repetition rate, in this case of the sequence of firearm shots.
And is there a cadence or is there a repetition between those signals, 4, 5, 6, 7, the white and the green arrows there, sir, that would indicate that it's also plausible or possible that that is from the same firearm?
Because the indicated sounds 4, 5, and 6 are interleaved with the gunshots indicated by the white arrows, it is conceivable that those sounds are due to a reflection of the gunshots that occurred 4, 5, and 6.
Okay. Thank you very much. No further testimony. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. Do you have any cross-exam, Mr. Mack?
I do, Your Honor. Dr. Maurer, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mack.
We haven't met yet, have we?
No, sir.
Okay. I actually want to take you back to where you ended, which is your conclusions in Exhibit 1060. These were your final conclusions as it related to your involvement in this case, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And in reviewing your report, it looks like you reached 3 different conclusions, is that correct?
As summarized in the display we're looking at there from that figure, yes, sir.
Okay. And what was your first conclusion?
The first conclusion was that the second barrage in this recording consists of 15 gunshots that are of sufficiently similar character that they can be attributed to a single shooter and single firearm.
Okay. And if you could read for me your second conclusion verbatim, can you do that for me?
Yes, sir. There are approximately 3 quieter and less distinct shots concurrent and overlapping with the dominant audible shots 4 through 6, and due to their different spectral character, these additional shots appear to be from another shooter and shooting location.
Okay. And really in the last sentence you indicate that these additional shots appear to be from another shooter and shooter location. Is that correct?
That's what I stated, yes.
Okay.
And I'm using the
You don't
qualifier
indicate-
there that they appear to be.
Okay. You don't have the language of gunshot-like sounds in that paragraph. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So I assume that you intended what you meant when you stated in that second paragraph that these additional shots appear to be from another shooter and shooting location. Did you mean that when you put that in your conclusions?
Well, I put it in the conclusion with the statement that they appear to be that way. I'm not able to make that claim to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty the way I can with the 15 other shots.
Can you look at that paragraph for me and indicate where the word echo is stated?
It does not state echo in that paragraph.
And you could have included that in your conclusion, correct?
I certainly could have, yes.
Why didn't you?
At the time that this analysis was done, I had been asked principally about the last shot of the first barrage, and so that was the analysis. And this was being repeated from the original report.
But you went on to state, even though you're talking about the analysis from the last barrage, or that middle shot, can we refer to as the middle shot?
Mm-hmm.
You still indicated, if you're saying that that's all you were asked about, you indicated that there were 15 gunshots that appear to come from the same firearm, same shooter, correct?
Yes.
You included that, correct?
Yes.
Okay. There were no restrictions. You could have indicated echo. Is that correct?
Yes. This particular statement here is repeated from the May 28th report. And it's off the screen, but there's a subsequent paragraph to this that describes the findings that are added to this original findings.
Let's assume that you are correct in your conclusion, that there are approximately 3 quieter and less distinct shots concurrent and overlapping with those dominant audible shots. You've stated that in your conclusion before, correct?
Yes.
Okay. That could mean that there are additional shooters during that final barrage. Is that correct?
The presence of those sounds there could be attributed to another firearm shooting at that time. Yes, sir.
Okay. And those 3 quieter audible shots, were you able to measure those to make a determination of whether or not they came from the same firearm?
No.
Okay. And the reason that you couldn't do that is because of what?
Because the timing of those is simultaneous with the louder shots that are indicated prior to that, so that there's an overlap in time between those 2 sounds, and so
I'm sorry, I didn't get it.
there's an overlap in time between those sounds. The sound of the gunshot that has been identified unequivocally, and then this other sound that could be from another firearm, or could be an echo, or could be some other source.
So, accepting your conclusion, if the 3 quieter shots could be from an additional shooter, and listening to what you just indicated, that also means that it could be from additional shooters, since you can't measure those. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. I'm not able to make that determination.
You're better at math than I am, but I'm going to assume that up to 3 additional shooters could have been discharging a weapon during that final barrage. Is that correct?
You're making a statement that it is hypothetical, so I don't know how I can address that, but
Okay.
yes, that is true.
Okay. Well, we don't know if it's hypothetical or not, because you can't measure those shots, correct?
I'd say that's the definition of hypothetical, and that we don't know.
Okay, we'll agree to disagree.
Okay.
If there's some claim that these quieter shots may be echoes, then why wouldn't echoes be present 7 through 15 or 1 through 4? What changed?
Between these shots, and one of the shots you may have seen in the spectrogram, I think it was number 10, is of a slightly louder character than the other ones, although the spectrum is very similar. If the firearm is changing its orientation or being changed with respect to the microphone, there can be a change in level and there can be a change in the loudness of that.
If what is
gunshot.
occurring?
If the orientation of the gun changes. So if the barrel is pointing in a different direction at different times, that can be detected in the acoustics. So if the theory would be if the gun was pointed in a different direction for those shots 4, 5, and 6 than it was for the other shots, it might be pointed in a direction, for instance, toward the hillside, which would result in an audible reflection,
So,
hypothetically.
I understand. You're indicating that if the gun is pointed in a different direction, that could be reason for it. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Even though the geographical environment has not changed, we don't know, based on the information that you have, is there anything that would suggest that the geographical environment changed?
No, from the video, the location of the microphone is fixed. There's no motion of the video which would indicate that there was anything changing there. But if the firearm was being fired by somebody moving at the time that the recording was made, it is possible that there would be audible effects of that. One of my published papers has to do with the directional characteristic of firearms, and it's definitely true that the sound level straight onto the barrel is often 20 or 30 decibels louder than it is off to the side or behind. And so changing the azimuth or the horizontal orientation of the gun can result in differences in the sound level.
In your field, does acoustic environment have any significance? What does that term mean?
The sound that's picked up by the microphone, as we've mentioned, includes the sound of gunshots, it includes the siren, it includes any other sounds that were made at that time, the utterance of a police officer. So all of those things are present. The sound also, as it's propagating from the muzzle blast from a gun, will reflect off the ground. It'll reflect off nearby surfaces, automobiles, buildings, trees, whatever is in the vicinity. And so some of that sound energy that is going off in different directions will reflect and also get picked up by the microphone at a later time, due to the fact that that sound now has traveled a longer distance because it's from the source to the reflecting surface and then to the microphone.
But reflection and echoes are different. Is that fair to say?
A reflection refers to the physics of why that wave changes direction, and
Right.
the echo is the audible effect of that.
All right. So did anything change in the environment based on your analysis?
No, there was not an ability to detect that other than what I'm using hypothetically would be that the firearm was changing its orientation.
Okay. And at the end of the day, you don't have in your conclusion that echoes is a part of your determination. Is that correct?
Earlier in the report, it
How
does
about your
describe the
conclusion?
acoustics, but not in the conclusion. You're right.
Okay. So assuming that you're correct, that these could be additional shooters, you're able to make a determination and measure the time in between shots. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you did that in this case. Is that correct?
For the 15 distinct shots that I've identified as being from a single firearm, yes, I did determine the time difference between those.
And also the other less quieter shots, you did it for that as well, correct?
All I was able to do with those was determine where they were within the sequence, but because they're uncertain, that was the difficulty I had in trying to identify the exact character of those particular sounds.
So let me take you to, I believe it's 1059. Do I need to do this? Or? I want to take you to page 9 of your original report. Okay. And you have a table there, is that correct?
Yes.
All right. And in that first column, you have listed shot, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then you have the asterisk next to the quieter shots that you referred to?
Yes.
Okay. And looking at shot number 4, in that 15, under the 15 shots that you previously described, you have an asterisk next to that, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then there's a time next to that asterisk, is that correct?
Yes.
And that time is supposed to reflect what in relation to that asterisk?
That was my best estimate of where that particular sound that I heard in critical listening occurred.
Okay. So you did try to approximate a time for those less quieter shots, correct?
Yes, I assigned that so I could include those in the figure.
Okay. And if you could, just indicate the amount of time elapsed between gunshot number 4 of the 15 and the first less quieter shot.
So that would be the difference between the file elapsed time indicated for the asterisk and the time for number 4, and just eyeballing it, it looks like it's 100 milliseconds.
100 milliseconds, okay. And what about between the first less quieter shot and gunshot number 5?
So you're referring to the 957.097 to 957.275, and so again, eyeballing that, it's about 250 milliseconds.
And can you indicate?
150 milliseconds, excuse me.
Okay, and we're talking about far less than a second, correct?
Yes, I'm sorry, by milliseconds, I'm referring to thousandths of a second, so that would be indicated as 0.1 on this time scale. I'm sorry to be confusing about that.
That's okay, I understood. The asterisk after gunshot number 5 in relation to gunshot number 6, what's the amount of file elapsed time between the two?
Okay, so between the asterisk and number 6 is what you're asking?
Yes.
So it looks like 140 milliseconds,
Okay.
0.14 seconds.
And between the asterisk, between 6 and 7, in relation to 7, what's the file elapsed time?
Between asterisk and 7?
After gunshot number 6, there's an asterisk, is that correct?
Yes.
And that represents the third less quieter shot that you referred to, is that correct?
Yes.
And gunshot number 7, what's the amount of time elapsed between those two?
That looks like a 656 to 909, so 250 milliseconds roughly.
Okay.
There was a time when I was able to do mental arithmetic, and that time has passed.
I'm still impressed. You're doing well. So, in your addendum in Exhibit 1060, you also reached a third and final conclusion concerning that middle shot. Is that correct?
This particular table does not include...
Not this table.
Yes, okay.
Okay?
So, okay, so we're not talking about this figure.
That's correct.
All right.
Okay? Going back to your addendum.
Yes.
Your final conclusions relative to this case. You reached a third conclusion regarding what we refer to as that middle shot.
Yes, sir.
Is that correct? And that was as a result of reading our expert's report, Gregory Stutchman. Is that correct?
I did read Mr. Stutchman's report.
Okay. But you were asked to review information that he had picked up on concerning that middle shot. Is that correct?
Yes. So in my original report, that middle shot is identified, the time is assigned, and it's shown in all the figures. In Mr. Stutchman's report, There was a comment made about that particular shot and its similarity to the second barrage shots. And so Mr. Bell had asked me to examine that middle shot, which I had not been asked to examine before.
All right. But that was as a result of our expert, Greg Stutchman, indicating that that middle shot was consistent with the 15 shots in the second barrage, and he believed that they came from the same firearm. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that was the first time that that information had surfaced, correct?
That's the first time I had been asked to look at that particular aspect of the recording. That is correct.
Okay. And you actually agreed with our expert, is that correct, regarding that middle shot?
Agreed in the sense of
You believe that that shot is consistent with the 15 shots in the second barrage and came from the same firearm?
Yes, as I stated in the report, yes.
Okay. So, looking at that middle shot, I'd like to go over some time with you. Can we go to 1059, table 2, I believe?
Okay, it would be indicated in figure 1.
Figure 1, excuse me. Your Honor, please the court. Can the witness step down?
By all means.
Thank you. And in figure number 1, okay, can you identify where that middle shot is?
What we're referring to as the middle shot, or the last shot of this first barrage, is located, indicated by this arrow. And if we follow that time up here, you can see that that occurs at approximately 9 minutes 54 seconds FET, file elapsed time.
Okay. And can you tell Judge O'Donnell the amount of time elapsed between that middle shot and the first gunshot of the second barrage?
I have it in the report. I can eyeball it and say it's about 2.5 seconds.
About 2.5 seconds? Okay. But it's not a lot of time, fair to say?
Well, compared to a millisecond, it's a very long time. So I guess it depends on your definition of time.
Compared to minutes, months.
Yes.
And can you identify for Judge O'Donnell the amount of time elapsed between the final shot and the first barrage and that middle shot?
I believe you're referring to the interval indicated between this arrow and that arrow, and I think we looked at that before, and it is indicated in the report, so it's from 9 minutes 52 seconds to 9 minutes 53 and a half, so it's about 1.5 seconds.
About 1.5 seconds, okay. And it is your testimony that this middle shot is consistent with the final 15 shots in that second barrage, is that correct?
Yes, that was the finding of the addendum report.
I know that you have seen stop clock in your life, correct?
Oh, yes.
Okay. And just for demonstrative purposes, I'd like to press start. Can you tell me to stop at 2 seconds? You gotta say it out loud. Oh, okay. We'll do it again. Tell me to stop after 2 seconds.
Stop.
Okay. That's 2 seconds, right? All right. It's a long time, huh? I'm sorry, in comparison to a millisecond.
Yes.
All right.
Would have been more effective if you had said start. I really couldn't see your thumb, but I get the notion.
He was looking at my mouth, Judge.
No, I'm saying if you're talking about demonstrating.
Okay.
But I get the point.
Okay.
Pardon my...
Thank you. Now, originally, Mr. Bell contacted you sometime in May of 2014, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And as a result of your conversation with Mr. Bell, you're indicating that you were supposed to determine exactly what?
His communication with me was that the sounds of the gunshots indicated as the second barrage were of interest to his investigation, and he was asking me whether it was possible to make a conclusion about those sounds having come from a single individual.
Okay. And as a result of your communication with Mr. Bell, you provided him with even more information by identifying 3 additional shots in that second barrage. Is that correct?
As part of the analysis of that portion of the recording, I was not going into the analysis expecting to come to Mr. Bell's conclusion. I have to make my analysis based on the information that's presented to me in the audio in a complete sense. And that's why I've identified other sounds present in the recording.
Right. So you provided Mr. Bell more information than what he was seeking. You indicated that there were 18 audible gunshots as a result of your analysis. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And in fact, you provided him with an entire table indicating that there were multiple shots in what you call a first barrage. Is that correct?
Yes. So
Okay.
the portion of the recording that includes audible gunshots is what I included in the report.
Okay. And in that first barrage, are you able to say how many gunshots are audible?
I was not asked to do that, and if I attempted to, I think I would have difficulty doing that because of the overlap of all of those sounds.
Okay. So as you sit here today, you don't know how many gunshots are present in that first barrage?
I do not know.
Okay. And you're aware that as a result of the information that you provided Mr. Bell, including those 3 additional shots coming from potentially other shooters, Mr. Bell had 4 other experts do peer review on your work. You're aware of that, correct?
Yes, I was aware of that.
Okay. And that Mr. Bell contacted those 4 additional experts sometime around June 24th and June 25th, and they did peer review on your work.
Yes, and I was not part of that
I understand.
aspect. I found out later, so it was not a,
Okay.
as I say, I did not submit it myself. That was done by Mr. Bell.
Okay. And have you reviewed the other experts' reports?
No.
Okay. You never have?
No, I've only heard from Mr. Bell that he has obtained additional expert reports.
Okay. Do you know what their conclusions were?
No.
Okay. You don't know any of these guys?
I do know them professionally, yes.
Okay.
As I mentioned, attending professional meetings is very common in any specialty field, and audio forensics is one of them. And so all the individuals that Mr. Bell has informed me that he contacted are people that I have met at a professional meeting.
You've always indicated that in both your first and your second report that 18 audible gunshots are present in that second barrage. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And do you know the total amount of time elapsed between the first shot of the first barrage and the final shot of the second barrage?
I can determine that from the figure. I'm looking at a copy of the report here in front of me.
Okay.
So the sequence of audible gunshots begins at approximately 9 minutes 42 seconds and ends at approximately 10 minutes and 2 seconds.
Okay. And how much time is that?
That would be 15, 16, 17, 19 seconds.
Okay. Is it fair to say that sometimes there are some other variables that may impact the quality of recording gunshots?
Yes.
Okay. So, for example, the quality of the microphone. Some microphones pick up better than others. Is that fair to say?
That's correct.
Okay. And can you tell me the make and model of this dash cam recorder that was in the Bracknell police car?
No, information was not provided to me.
Okay. Do you know anything about its reliability, or do you know anything about its ability to pick up gun sounds as opposed to human speech?
Other than the fact that the gunshots are audible in this recording, no, I've not tested this specific type of system.
Okay. The fact that the microphone, in this particular case, is inside of a police car with all that background noise going on, could that impact your ability to hear all the shots?
It potentially would have an impact, yes.
Okay. Do you know what the distance was between the dash cam recorder and the suspect vehicle?
That information was not provided to me at the time that these reports were prepared. However, yesterday I was brought to the scene at the school and visually observed the stated location of the Bracknell police vehicle and where the shootings took place.
Okay. Are there some other variables that could impact the ability to really pick up good quality sound?
The presence of interfering sounds would be one concern.
Gunshots, sirens, people talking, doors closing. Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Okay.
Any other types of sounds that are present would be of a concern, and that's why those are all identified in this particular recording.
Let me ask you this question. How does a percussion microphone differ from a dash cam recorder in a police car?
I'm not sure what you mean by percussion microphone.
Okay. Is there such a device that is used specifically for picking up gunshot sounds rather than human speech?
Yes, when we do scientific recordings of gunshots, we generally use a different type of microphone than would be used for a speech recording.
Okay, and what is that called?
Those generally are small diaphragm electret condenser microphones.
Okay. And that's to make sure that the amount of distortion is cut down and the quality is increased with respect to gunshot sounds specifically. Is that correct?
Yes, so the engineering of those particular microphones is intended to be able to accommodate the very high sound pressure level that would be present from a firearm discharge. And it's a different engineering consideration to record speech, which is generally at a lower sound pressure level.
Okay. Let me ask you this. If given the opportunity to do this all over again, is there any way that you would have suggested in replicating this situation so you'd have the ability to really pick up better quality sounds? For example, whether it's BCI or someone else, just going back to the school like you did yesterday, taking the same model firearm, similar car, sirens. Could you have duplicated all of that to make a determination of who fired the shots? Or which specific gun the shots came from?
It would certainly be feasible to reconstruct the scene and test various aspects of this recording.
Okay. Because right now, as you sit here, you really cannot identify for the state of Ohio which gun these shots came from. Is that fair to say?
That's correct. From the sound alone, it is not scientifically possible to attribute that to a specific firearm.
Okay. And all of these shots in the first barrage, whether it's 40, 50, 60, those all preceded that second barrage. This is chronological, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Multiple guns firing? Okay.
Yes.
Did you use cross-correlation analysis as a part of your methodology in this case?
I'm familiar with cross-correlation analysis, but I did not use that in this case.
Why not?
The information that I was provided with did not allow me to have confidence that this particular recording was made with a linear recorder rather than a audio perceptually compressed device.
You may have to speak in English.
Sorry about that.
What does that mean?
If An audio recording is made using a perceptual audio coder, such as MP3, if you're familiar with that term, or like iTunes. Those types of devices are designed to record the spectrum of the sound accurately, but not necessarily maintaining the waveform itself. They're not a waveform coder. Since I did not know the nature of the encoding that was used for the audio in this device, that made me less certain that I wanted to use cross-correlation analysis.
Okay.
Pardon me, Mr. Knapp.
Yes, Your Honor.
You have some estimate, if it's only a couple minutes, we'll keep going.
I think it's just a couple minutes. Maybe I'm done. I have to check back. Thank you.
So you're checking with the co-counsel?
Yes, sir.
Go off the record for just a minute.
Our small version of the text.
I'm ready, Judge.
All right, so we're back on the record.
Dr. Maurer, did you ever find out the actual distance between the dash cam and the suspect vehicle?
I did not measure it. My observation was it was on the order of 30 or 40 meters.
Okay. And you did that based on yesterday going out there?
Yes.
Okay. Were there any vehicles that were situated, or did someone just explain to you that this is where this was and this is where this vehicle was? How did that happen?
I was accompanied or driven to the scene by Mr. Gallagher, and he showed me nail heads that had been placed in the pavement indicating where the vehicles were located, and then he pointed to the nearby street where the Brattenall vehicle was reported to have stopped. And so I walked from the location in the driveway out to the street and just roughly paced it off. I did not make a careful measurement of that distance.
Okay. Of the shooters involved in this case, do you know the number of shooters that had Glock 17s?
I do not know that.
And are you aware that the scene of Heritage Middle School is an open environment? There are no large buildings around. You got Heritage Middle School, but outside of that, it really is an open environment. Isn't that correct?
I was able to observe that, yes.
Okay.
I also, at that time, did make several shouts to indicate to me what the echo or the acoustic environment was, but I did do that. So, depending on what you mean by open environment.
I'd ask that that be stricken, Judge. I didn't ask him a question, but I appreciate it.
Well, it's an opinion that hasn't been provided for trial.
Okay. Anything else?
Okay, sorry, Your Honor.
I have no further questions. Thank you. Sir, you remain under oath. I have a couple questions I want to ask you. I expect that the prosecutor has some redirect. We're going to take a break at this point. You're still under oath. Please plan on returning to the stand at 3 o'clock.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. We're off the record. Let's say 3 o'clock, please. And Ms. Barnhill, do you mind leaving that up? Or just having it ready at 3?
Very good, Judge.
What happened? You cancelled the appointment?
My doctor got sick.
Oh.
I know. Can you believe it? The gall. But I'll be able to day after.
Discretion.